Welcome to our second video on completing the square. So in this video I'm just going to run through a bunch of examples where we'll complete the square. So we want to write this quadratic in vertex form. So that's the process of completing the square. So what you do, y equals x squared minus 10x, so leave the first two terms, and then sort of ignore that last term, you just stick it at the end. And then we want to make this term, and the next term a perfect square. So you think, what numbers add to negative 10? What number with itself adds to negative 10? So the sum should be negative 10. And the number that you add with itself to get negative 10 is negative 5 and negative 5. Well, the product of these two numbers would then be 25. And that's what you need to as your c value. Of course, you can't just put 25. You have to put negative 25 so that these two terms basically cancel each other out and just make 0. Then you're going to group the first three terms, and that should factor as a perfect square. Will always factor as a perfect square. So the numbers that multiply to 25 and add to negative 10, we just said, are negative 5 and negative 5. There's two factors, so it's squared, and then you add these last terms together. So negative 25 plus 1 is negative 25. Lo and behold, vertex form. Right, y equals a x minus h squared plus k. A is 1, h is 5, k is negative 24. Let's go with find the minimum value. Let's say minimum point of y equals x squared plus 5x plus 3. Same process. Y equals, so actually before I start, so find the minimum point. The minimum point would be your vertex. Right? Your vertex is your minimum or maximum. In this case, you know you'll have a minimum because the coefficient in front of x squared is positive, meaning the parabola opens up, meaning it's a minimum. If the coefficient was negative, it would open down, and you would have maximum. Okay, so now just take the first terms, leave them, x squared plus 5x, and the plus 3 will give some space. Now we're going to have to add and subtract some number that would make this, the first three terms, a perfect square. So you need to think of the two numbers that sum, the one number that sums with itself to give you 5. Well, what number plus itself is 5? The answer is, in this case, it's not a whole number. It's always just going to be half this number. So the number would be 5 over 2 and 5 over 2, half of 5. Or you could write 2.5 if you want. So the product of 5 over 2 times 5 over 2, or 5 over 2 squared, is 25 over 4. You just 5 times 5 is 25, 2 times 2 is 4, or you square it. So we're going to add 25 over 4 and subtract 25 over 4. Group the first three terms. Y equals, should be a perfect square. You might be thinking, okay, how do I factor that as a perfect square? I don't like to deal with the fractions. It's hard for me to think of a number that multiplies to this and gives me this. Well, you already found it. It's always this number. It's always 5 over 2. It's always half that middle number. So it's just going to be 5 over 2. 5 over 2 plus 5 over 2 is 5. 5 over 2 squared is 25 over 4. So that's always your number. And then now adding these terms, a little bit more work because you have to get a common denominator. In this case, the common denominator would be 4. you multiply 3 times 4 to get 12, and just add the numerators here. So x plus 5 over 2 squared minus 13 over 4 minus 25 plus 12 is negative 13. So the vertex is, just read it off, so 5 over 2, but remember, always sort of the opposite sign there, and negative 13 over 4. You might want to write that as a decimal, so some people would write negative 2.5 and negative, what is this, 3.25. So, therefore, the minimum point is this, or you could leave it in the fraction form. And actually, I generally prefer the fraction form, and there's reasons for that. A lot of people don't like working with fractions, but actually, you're going to see when we do more examples of completing the square, it's actually probably easier to deal with the fractions than to go to the decimals, because a lot of times in order to use decimals, you need a calculator, but with the fractions, you won't.